Why did they keep calling her an imposter when she had already saved one of their own? She didn't answer them, not when the zip ties cut into her wrists, not when boots echoed behind her like judgment, not even when the man collapsed in front of her, face pale, body rigid, heat rising off him like a warning no one else could read correctly. She just stopped walking. The two SEALs escorting her nearly dragged her forward before realizing she had anchored herself in place. One of them muttered something sharp. The other tightened his grip. But Sloane Hayes wasn't looking at them. She was looking at the trainee on the ground. There was something wrong with the way his chest moved. Too shallow, too fast. His skin wrong, not sweating. That detail mattered more than anything else happening in that corridor. His temperature's critical, she said, voice steady, almost quiet. That's not heat exhaustion. Someone nearby was already pouring water over him. Another voice barked protocol into a radio. Wrong protocol. Sloane felt a flicker of frustration, quick, controlled, buried just as fast. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. He's going into heat stroke. Core temperature above 104. He'll seize if you don't change what you're doing. A pause. It was subtle, but it happened. The moment when uncertainty cracked open space for something else. For trust. Or maybe just doubt. She kept going, calm, precise, like she had seen this before. Because she had. Ice packs, groin, neck, armpits, call for active cooling, not surface treatment. The corpsman hesitated, then moved. And just like that, chaos reorganized itself around her certainty. Sloane watched for a few seconds, confirmed, adjusted nothing. Then she started walking again, like none of it had been unusual. But something had shifted. Finch, she'd heard his name earlier, was watching her now. Not with hostility, not exactly, something quieter, sharper. Recognition trying to form without enough evidence. She ignored it. Being watched was nothing new. Being misunderstood was worse. Her name was Sloane Merritt Hayes, 27, hospital corpsman, 4 years active service, clean record, too clean some would say. Except for the gap. 8 months that didn't exist on paper. And apparently, didn't sit well with people who knew how records were supposed to look. That was why she was here. Why her wrists were tied. Why an intelligence officer was already waiting for her, in a room that smelled faintly of dust and fluorescent lighting. He didn't look angry. That would have been easier to deal with. He looked precise. Methodical. Like a man who didn't ask questions, unless he was already certain something didn't add up. He opened the file, read from it like it had already disappointed him. April through December 2019, no record. Sloane said nothing. Silence wasn't resistance, it was discipline. I'd like to understand what you were doing in Kunar province, he continued. The words landed. Not loud, not dramatic. Just heavy. She looked at the table. There were 100 ways to answer that question, most of them wrong. Most of them dangerous. I'd like to make a call, she said instead. He didn't like that answer. She didn't expect him to. Rear Admiral Warren Decker, she added. Walter Reed. A flicker of hesitation crossed his face. Small, controlled. But real. He'll answer. And then she went quiet again. Because there were things she hadn't told them. Not yet. Not until it mattered. 3 weeks earlier, none of this had existed. She had arrived at Coronado like any other transfer, orders in hand, reason legitimate, timing convenient. A replacement. Someone had gotten injured, someone always did. She had stepped into the gap. And from the moment she arrived, she could feel it, the distance. Not hostility. Something more measured. Professional skepticism. She didn't resent it. Trust wasn't given in places like this, it was earned. and even then carefully. Finch had been the first to say it out loud. "A corpsman half my size," he'd said, almost amused. "That's new." She didn't respond. Didn't need to. Because words didn't change perception. Action did. The others were quieter. Ashby noticed everything but said almost nothing. Rainier offered a handshake. That was enough. And Roar, the senior chief, had simply watched her like a problem he intended to solve eventually. "Can you do the job?" he asked. "Yes." No hesitation, no elaboration. He studied her for a moment longer, then moved on. That was his version of acceptance. Or maybe just postponement. The first few days were exactly what she expected. Testing, not formal, not obvious, but constant. Every movement observed. Every decision weighed. She let it happen. Because proving yourself wasn't about convincing people. It was about being consistent long enough that they stopped looking for flaws. Then came the fourth day. The heat. The collapse. The moment everything changed. She moved before anyone else fully understood what was happening. Kneeling beside the trainee, Mercer. Pulse rapid, skin dry, eyes unfocused. Exertional heat stroke. She had seen it before. Not in training. In places where mistakes didn't get corrected. Only buried. "Don't pour water," she said. They almost argued. Almost. But something in her voice stopped them. Not authority. Not urgency. Certainty. The kind that didn't need to be defended. They followed her instructions. And slowly Mercer came back. Not fully. But enough. Enough to survive. Sloane didn't celebrate. Didn't look around for acknowledgement. She just stood up and stepped back. Like it was routine. Because for her it was. But as she turned, her hand brushed against a rifle. And for a split second, her fingers found the safety selector. Automatically. Effortlessly. Like muscle memory from somewhere deeper than training. Ashby saw it. She knew he did. She didn't explain. Didn't need to. But she filed it away. Because small things mattered. Especially the ones people noticed but didn't understand yet. Later that day, during a routine movement along the perimeter, she caught herself doing it again. Not the rifle. The terrain. Angles, elevation, blind spots. She was mapping vulnerabilities without thinking. Roar noticed. Of course he did. "Most corpsmen watch the men," he said. "I watch both," she replied. He didn't respond. But she could feel it, the shift. Subtle. Incomplete. But real. Then came the alert. Her credentials flagged. Not denied. Escalated. That was worse. Because it meant someone higher up had taken interest. And interest meant questions. The escort arrived quickly. Professional. Polite. Unyielding. She went with them without resistance. Because she had known this was coming. From the moment she stepped onto the base. The holding room was exactly what she expected. Plain. Functional. Forgettable. She sat down, felt the pull of scar tissue in her shoulder. Ignored it. Pain was information. Nothing more. The interrogation followed. Questions she didn't answer. Details she didn't provide. Until the name came up again. Kunar. Afghanistan. And everything inside her went still. Not outwardly. Outwardly she remained calm. Controlled. But internally, something shifted. Because that place wasn't just a location. It was a line. A before and after. and she wasn't ready to cross it. Not yet. So she made the call, or rather asked for one. And when the line finally connected, the voice on the other end was slower than she remembered. Weaker, but unmistakable. "I'm told you walked into a base with outdated credentials," he said, "and corrected a medical emergency while being detained." "Yes, sir." A pause. Heavy. Measured. "How long have you been there?" 4 days. Another pause. Longer this time. "And you waited until now." I needed to understand the situation first. There was something like recognition in his silence. Something that reached back years. To a different place. A different version of both of them. Then she said the word that mattered. Envelope. And everything changed. Because some truths didn't need explanation. They just needed the right person to hear them. "I'll be there," he said finally. And just like that, the balance shifted. Not visibly. Not yet. But underneath everything, something had begun to move. And Sloane sat there in the quiet room, wrists still marked from restraints, and felt something she hadn't allowed herself in a long time. Not relief. Not yet. Something smaller. Something quieter. The possibility that the past wasn't done with her. And that soon, she wouldn't be able to stay silent anymore. Because some debts didn't fade with time. They waited. Patient. Unfinished. And when they finally came due, they asked for everything. Why did the word envelope make a seasoned admiral drop everything and fly across the country? No one in the room asked that question out loud. But Sloane could feel it. In the way the intelligence officer stopped writing. In the way Finch shifted his weight against the wall. In the way silence thickened, not empty but loaded. She sat still, hands folded now, no restraints. They had taken those off the moment the call ended. Not as an apology. As a precaution. Because uncertainty had replaced accusation, and that was far more dangerous. "Who is Rear Admiral Decker to you?" the officer finally asked. Sloane didn't look up. Someone who remembers things others forgot. It wasn't the answer he wanted, but it was the only one she was willing to give. A long breath filled the room, then left it. Measured, controlled. Like everything here. "Until he arrives," he said, closing the file halfway. "You're not under arrest, but you're not cleared either." A pause. "You'll remain on base." She nodded once. That was enough. But as she stood to leave, something caught her attention. A reflection in the glass. Not her own. Finch. Still watching. Still trying to figure her out. And for a brief second their eyes met, not directly, but through that faint mirrored surface. There was no hostility there now. Just something unsettled. Something that didn't like loose ends. She understood that feeling. Too well. Outside the air felt different. Same temperature. Same ocean breeze. But heavier. Like the base itself was holding its breath. News traveled fast in places like this. Not officially. But through glances, half-sentences, changed tones. By the time she crossed the courtyard, people already knew. Not the details. Just the outline. The new corpsman. The flagged file. The admiral. That was enough to turn curiosity into distance. She didn't mind. Distance was easier than expectation. Easier than questions she couldn't answer yet. Roar found her near the edge of the training grounds. He didn't call out. Just stood beside her, arms crossed, watching a team run drills below. "You bring admirals into my command often?" he asked. His tone was dry. but not unkind. No, good, a beat. Then, you want to tell me what this is about? There it was. Direct, clean, earned. Sloane kept her eyes on the field. I was deployed somewhere that doesn't exist on paper. Roar didn't react immediately. Didn't interrupt. That alone told her something. You saved someone important, he asked after a moment. She almost smiled. Almost. Everyone's important when they're bleeding. That's not what I asked. No, it was. And they both knew it. She exhaled slowly. There was an operation, she said. It went wrong. Understatement. But accurate. Roar waited. She didn't continue. Not yet. Because even saying that much pulled at something buried deep. Something sharp. You don't trust me, he said finally. It wasn't an accusation. Just a fact laid out between them. Sloane shook her head slightly. It's not about trust. Then what? She turned to look at him now. Really look. At the lines carved by years of command. At the patience built from experience. At the quiet expectation that truth, when given, should be complete. It's about timing, she said. Roar held her gaze for a few seconds. Then nodded. Once. Fair enough. And just like that, the pressure eased. Not gone. But managed. He didn't push further. Didn't need to. Because whatever this was, it was bigger than him. Bigger than her. And soon it would surface. Whether she wanted it to or not. That night came slower than usual. Or maybe it just felt that way. Sloane lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling. The room was quiet. Too quiet. Her body was tired. But her mind, restless. It kept circling back. Not to the interrogation. Not to the suspicion. But to a place far from here. Dry air. Sharp mountains. The kind of silence that wasn't peaceful. Just waiting. Kunar province. She closed her eyes. And for a moment, she was there again. Not as she was now, but as she had been. Dust on her boots. Blood on her hands. Radio static cutting through everything. And a voice. Strained. Fadding. Hayes, stay with me. She inhaled sharply. Eyes opening. Back in the present. Back in control. But her hand had clenched into the sheets. Knuckles white. She forced herself to relax. Slowly. Deliberately. Because losing control, even for a second, wasn't an option. Not then. Not now. There was a knock at the door. Soft. Measured. She sat up. Come in. It was Ashby. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him without a sound. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, you handled Mercer right, he said. Simple. Direct. Sloane nodded. Thank you. Another pause. But this one felt different. Less formal. More human. You've done that before, he added. Not a question. A statement. Yes. He studied her. Not suspiciously. Curiously. Where? There it was again. The edge. The line she wasn't supposed to cross. She looked down at her hands. Then back up. Somewhere hot, she said. Ashby let out a quiet breath. Almost a laugh. But not quite. Yeah, he said, that tracks. He didn't push. Didn't need to. But before he turned to leave, he hesitated. Finch doesn't like not knowing things, he said. Sloane raised an eyebrow slightly. I noticed. He's not trying to make this harder for you. I know. Ashby nodded, then left. And just like that, the room felt quiet again. But not empty, because something had shifted. Not in the investigation. In the people. Small cracks forming. In assumptions. In distance. In the idea that she didn't belong. And sometimes, that was how trust began. Not with answers. With doubt. The next morning arrived with movement. More than usual. Subtle, but unmistakable. Vehicles repositioning. Voices tighter. Eyes watching the sky more than the ground. Sloane noticed it immediately. Of course she did. Patterns were hard to ignore once you learned to see them. She stepped outside. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, but the base was already awake. And then she heard it. Distant at first. Low. Steady. Growing louder. A helicopter. Not standard rotation. Too deliberate. Too focused. She didn't need confirmation. She already knew. He was here. People began to gather. Not openly, not in formation, but in that quiet way professionals observe something important without making it obvious. The helicopter descended with controlled precision. Dust lifted. Air shifted. And for a moment, everything else faded into the background. The door opened, and Rear Admiral Walter Decker stepped out. Older than she remembered. Slower, but still carrying something that couldn't be taught. Authority, yes, but also weight. The kind that came from decisions no one ever talked about. His eyes scanned the area once, twice, then stopped. On her. No hesitation. No confusion. Recognition. Clear. Immediate. And something else. Something deeper. Something that reached back to that place she hadn't spoken about. Not yet. Sloane didn't move. Didn't step forward. Didn't salute. She just stood there. Because this wasn't protocol. This was something else. Decker walked toward her. Each step measured. Deliberate. And as he got closer, the silence around them grew heavier. Like everyone understood. Without understanding. That this moment mattered. When he finally stopped in front of her, there was no greeting. No formal exchange. Just a long look. The kind that held years inside it. You look different, he said quietly. Sloane's voice was steady. So do you, sir. A faint smile. Brief. Gone just as quickly. Then his expression shifted. Serious. Focused. He turned slightly, just enough to acknowledge the others watching. This officer, he said, voice carrying now, is not an imposter. A ripple. Subtle. But real. And whatever questions you have, he continued, you will direct them to me. No room for argument. No space for doubt. Because authority, when used like that, didn't ask for permission. It settled things. At least on the surface. But as he turned back to Sloane, lowering his voice again, there was something else there. Something unresolved. You kept it, he said. Not a question. Her answer was just as quiet. Yes, sir. Another pause. Then, good. But the way he said it, it didn't sound like relief. It sounded like preparation. Because whatever was inside that envelope wasn't just proof. It was a story. One that hadn't been told yet. One that, once revealed, would change everything. And Sloane felt it again. That same quiet tension. That same approaching weight. The past wasn't just catching up. It was arriving. And this time, there would be no silence left to hide behind. Why did the Admiral refuse to open the envelope in front of everyone, when it was the one thing that could end all doubt instantly? Because some truths weren't meant for rooms full of witnesses. And some stories changed the people who heard them. Sloane stood exactly where she had been when the helicopter landed, still, grounded, but inside something had begun to shift. Not fear. Not quite. Something closer to inevitability. Rear Admiral Decker didn't speak again right away. Instead, he gestured, subtle, controlled, and the intelligence officer stepped forward, tension still visible beneath his composed exterior. "Private room," Decker said. Not a request. Within minutes, they were inside. A smaller space this time, fewer eyes, thicker silence. Just four of them. Decker, the intelligence officer, Roar, and Sloane. The door closed with a soft, final sound. For a moment, no one moved. Then Decker exhaled, slow, deliberate, and looked at Sloane in a way that felt less like rank and more like memory. "Do you have it?" he asked. She reached into her pack, carefully, deliberately, and pulled it out. The envelope. Plain, worn, edges softened by time and handling. But intact. Always intact. She held it for a second longer than necessary. Not hesitation. Respect. Then handed it over. Decker took it like it carried weight beyond paper. Because it did. The intelligence officer leaned forward slightly. "You're saying that explains the missing 8 months?" he asked. Decker didn't answer him. Not yet. Instead, he opened the envelope. Slowly, like he already knew what was inside, but needed to see it again. Inside were documents, photographs, a folded report stamped with markings that didn't belong to any system most people ever saw. Decker scanned them quickly, then more slowly. His jaw tightened, not in anger, in recognition. Roar shifted slightly. "You've seen this before," he said. Decker nodded once. "Yes." The room stilled. The officer stepped closer. "Sir, with respect, what exactly is this?" Decker closed the file. Carefully. Then looked at him. "This," he said quietly, "is the part of the war we don't brief." Silence. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Because that sentence didn't clarify anything. It expanded the unknown. He turned back to Sloane. "You were told never to keep copies." Her voice didn't waver. "I was told to survive." A pause. Then, "And to remember." Something flickered in Decker's eyes. Not surprise. Something deeper. Something that carried both pride and regret. The intelligence officer crossed his arms. "That's not enough," he said. "We have procedures." "You have protocols," Decker cut in. Calm. Controlled. "But you don't have context." That shut the room down. For a moment. Because rank could do that. But truth. Truth held longer. Roar stepped forward slightly. "Then give it to us," he said. Direct. Unflinching. "If she's part of something we need to understand, we understand it." Decker looked at him for a long second. Measuring. Weighing. Then, he nodded. Once. And just like that, the past began to surface. "Kunar Province," he said, voice quieter now. "Late 2019. Joint Reconnaissance and Recovery Operation. Officially, it never happened." Sloane felt it. That pull. That shift, like stepping back into a place she had spent months trying to leave behind. There was an intel failure, Decker continued. Bad coordinates, compromised extraction. A team walked into an ambush they were never supposed to face. Roar's expression hardened. How many? Decker didn't answer immediately. Enough, he said finally. Not a number. A weight. The intelligence officer leaned forward. And she was there. Decker looked at Sloane. Not as a question. As confirmation. She wasn't supposed to be, he said. Sloane's fingers tightened slightly at her sides. That part always sounded simple. It was. I was reassigned last minute, she said. Her voice was steady, but quieter now. Medical support. Into an active recon zone, the officer pressed. That was the mistake, she replied. Not defensive. Just factual. Decker continued. The ambush lasted 11 minutes, he said. Felt like hours. The room didn't move. Didn't breathe. Because now, they were inside it. Communications went down first, he said. Then air support was pulled due to misidentified hostiles. Sloane could hear it again. The static. The broken signals. The sudden absence of backup. By the time I realized what had happened, Decker said, half my team was already down. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't dramatize it. He didn't need to. Because truth, when spoken like that, carried its own weight. And you, Roar asked. Decker didn't look away. I was one of them. Silence hit harder this time. Because now, it wasn't abstract. It was personal. The officer frowned. But you survived. A faint, almost humorless breath left Decker. Yes, he said. Then his eyes shifted to Sloane. Because she refused to leave. The words settled slowly. Like dust after impact. Sloane didn't move. Didn't react. Because that sentence was only the beginning. There was no extraction window, Decker continued. No reinforcements, just terrain and time working against them. Roar's voice dropped. What did she do? Decker didn't answer immediately. He was looking at the photographs again. At something only he fully understood. Then, she adapted. Simple word. Heavy meaning. Sloane's mind didn't want to go there. But it did anyway. The ridge. The gunfire. The smell of earth and metal. The moment when being a medic stopped being enough. I treated who I could, she said quietly. But that wasn't enough. No one spoke. Because they could hear what she wasn't saying. Decker finished it. So she became something else. The officer's brow tightened. Meaning. Decker met his gaze. She picked up a rifle. Silence. Not shock. Something deeper. Because that crossed a line. One that wasn't supposed to blur. But in war, lines didn't always hold. She held that position for 6 hours, Decker said. Alone. Sloane closed her eyes for a brief second. 6 hours. It hadn't felt like time. It had felt like survival stretched too thin. I wasn't alone, she said softly. Roar looked at her. Who was with you? She opened her eyes, but didn't look at him. Everyone who didn't make it out. That landed. Hard. Because grief didn't always sound loud. Sometimes, it sounded like that. Decker stepped in again. By the time extraction was possible, he said, she had stabilized the wounded, secured the perimeter, and kept what was left of my team alive. The officer exhaled slowly. Processing. Trying to fit that into something structured. Something explainable. But none of this is in the official record, he said. No, Decker replied. Because officially, it never happened. Roar frowned. That doesn't make sense. It does, Sloane said quietly. They looked at her. And for the first time, she didn't hold back. Because acknowledging it, she continued, means admitting the failure that caused it. Silence. Understanding. Slow. Uncomfortable. But real. Decker nodded slightly. That's why she disappeared from records, he said. Reassigned, reclassified, moved where her skill set could be used without raising questions. The officer looked between them. And now, Decker closed the envelope. Carefully. Now she's here, he said. And you questioned whether she belonged. No accusation. Just truth. And truth, when spoken like that, didn't need force. It just stayed. Roar stepped back slightly. Not in retreat. In recalibration. Because everything he thought he understood had just shifted. Finch's voice echoed faintly from outside the door. Unaware. Uninvolved. For now. And Sloane stood in the center of it all. Not proud. Not relieved. Just present. Because this wasn't vindication. It wasn't victory. It was exposure. And exposure meant the past was no longer hers alone to carry. Decker looked at her one more time. Why keep the envelope? He asked quietly. She met his gaze. Finally, because that question deserved an answer. Because I knew one day, she said, someone would ask who I was. A pause. Soft. Heavy. And I didn't want the answer to be silence. No one spoke after that. Because some answers didn't need anything added to them. They just needed to be heard. And in that quiet room, they were. But even as the truth settled, something else lingered. Unspoken. Unresolved. Because survival wasn't the end of a story. Sometimes, it was just the part people talked about. What came after. What it cost. What it changed. That was the part no file ever captured. And as Sloane stood there, feeling the weight of eyes that now saw her differently, she knew this wasn't over. Not even close. Because being understood didn't erase what happened. It just made it harder to ignore. And somewhere deep inside, the part of her that had stayed on that ridge for 6 hours was still waiting, still watching, still carrying something no one else could see. Not yet, but soon. Because some stories didn't end when the mission was over. They followed you. Quiet, patient, until the moment came when you finally had to face what you survived. Why did the truth, once finally spoken, feel heavier than the silence she had carried for months? No one in the room said it. But Sloane felt it settle anyway. Not like relief. Like weight shifting from one place to everywhere. The envelope lay closed again on the table, its contents no longer hidden, but not fully understood either, because facts explained events. They didn't explain impact. Roar was the first to move. Not abruptly, not emotionally. Just a step back, a recalibration of distance. As if he needed space to rebuild the version of her he thought he knew. Finch stood just outside the door when it opened. He looked up instantly, eyes sharp, searching, already expecting something. What happened? He asked. Roar didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at Sloane, not as a suspect anymore. Not even as just a corpsman. As something more complicated. Then he turned to Finch. She stays, he said simply. That was it. No explanation, no details. But in a place like this, tone mattered more than words. And Finch understood. He nodded once, slow. But his eyes drifted back to Sloane, still trying to connect the version of her he had seen with the one he hadn't known existed. She didn't meet his gaze. Not out of avoidance. Out of control. Because attention, especially this kind, had a way of pulling things out of you. Things she wasn't ready to give. Not all at once. The day moved forward, but nothing felt routine anymore. Training resumed, orders were given, movements executed. But beneath it all, there was a shift. Subtle, persistent. People looked at her differently now. Not openly, not dramatically, but in small ways. The pauses lasted longer. The assumptions came slower. Even the silence around her had changed. Before, it had been dismissive. Now it was careful. And that made things harder. Because being underestimated was simple. Being seen was. Sloane adjusted her gear in the staging area, fingers moving with quiet precision. Same motions. Same routine. But her thoughts weren't on the task. They were somewhere else. Still, on that ridge. On the hours that hadn't been spoken about in full. Because Decker had told them what happened. Not what it felt like. And that difference mattered. Hey. She looked up. Finch. Standing a few feet away. Less guarded than before. But not entirely at ease either. Roar says you're back on rotation, he said. Yes. A pause. He shifted slightly, like he wasn't used to this version of the conversation. Look, he added, about earlier. You did your job, Sloane said. Cutting it off. Not cold. Just final. Because apologies weren't necessary. And she didn't want them. Finch studied her for a moment. You don't make it easy, he said. A faint hint of something. Not quite frustration, not quite respect. Easy isn't the point, she replied. Another pause. Then, unexpectedly, he nodded. Fair. And just like that, the tension eased. Not gone, but different. Because understanding didn't erase doubt. It just changed its shape. Training that afternoon pushed harder than usual. Or maybe it just felt that way. Sloane moved through it without hesitation. Not faster than the others. Not stronger. But precise. Always precise. Every movement measured. Every decision intentional. Ashby watched her more closely now. Not with suspicion. With recognition. Like he was starting to see the patterns. The habits that didn't come from standard training. The way she positioned herself without thinking. The way her awareness stretched beyond what was directly in front of her. It wasn't showy. It wasn't obvious. But it was there. And people like him noticed. Halfway through a live-fire drill, something shifted. It was small. Barely visible. A hesitation. A misread. One of the newer operators, Jensen, stepped into a line he shouldn't have. It happened fast. Too fast for correction through instruction. But not too fast for instinct. Down. Sloane's voice cut through the noise. Sharp, immediate. Jensen dropped without thinking. A round cracked past where his head had been. Too close. Too real. Silence followed. Not full silence, but the kind where everything slows for a second. Registers. Then catches up. The drill halted. Roar stepped in immediately. Reset positions. Calm, controlled. But his eyes flicked to Sloane. Just for a moment. Acknowledging. confirming. She stepped back, like nothing had happened, like it wasn't worth attention. Because to her, it was. It was just awareness, just timing, just doing what needed to be done. But Jensen approached her afterward, still shaken, still trying to process. He started, then stopped. Didn't know what to say. She didn't wait for him to figure it out. Next time, she said quietly, trust the space around you, not just what you see. He nodded, slowly, because that advice didn't sound like something from a manual. It sounded like something learned the hard way. That night the base settled again. But Sloane didn't. Sleep didn't come easily. It rarely did anymore. She sat outside instead, far enough from the main quarters to avoid noise, close enough to hear the ocean. Steady, rhythmic, predictable, unlike memory. Footsteps approached. She didn't turn, didn't need to. Couldn't sleep either, Decker's voice. Older now, but still carrying that same quiet authority. No, sir. He sat beside her, not as an admiral, just as someone who had been there. In that place, in that moment that never really left. For a while, neither of them spoke, because silence between people who understood wasn't uncomfortable. It was necessary. You didn't tell them everything, he said eventually. Not a question. Sloane's gaze stayed on the horizon. No. Why? A long pause. Because the answer wasn't simple. Because they don't need all of it, she said. Decker studied her. They deserve the truth. They got it. He shook his head slightly. They got the version that fits. That landed. Because he wasn't wrong. But neither was she. There are parts, Sloane said quietly, that don't help anyone. Decker's expression softened. Just slightly. Or parts you don't want to face. She didn't respond immediately. Because that was closer to the truth than she liked. Finally she exhaled. Both. The word hung there. Honest. Unprotected. Decker leaned back slightly, looking out at the same dark horizon. You held that ridge longer than anyone expected, he said. Sloane's jaw tightened. That's not what I remember. He glanced at her. What do you remember? And there it was. The question she had been avoiding. Not from them. From herself. Her fingers curled slightly against her arms. Subtle, but enough. I remember running out of supplies, she said. Her voice quieter now. Then running out of options. The ocean kept moving. Unchanged. Unbothered. I remember making decisions, she continued. Fast ones. A pause. And I remember not all of them being right. Silence followed. He didn't interrupt. Didn't correct. Because some admissions weren't meant to be fixed. They lived, Decker said after a moment. Some did, she replied. And that distinction mattered more than anything. Decker nodded slowly, as if acknowledging something unspoken. Something heavier than survival. You did what you had to, he said. Sloane shook her head slightly. That doesn't mean it doesn't stay with you. He didn't argue. Because he knew. Better than most. Another long silence. Then, it wasn't just the rifle, was it? He asked. Her breath caught. Barely noticeable. But real. Because that question, that one went deeper. She didn't answer. Not with words. But the silence itself said enough. Decker looked away. Back toward the horizon. Understanding settling in. Not fully, but enough. Some lines, he said quietly, once crossed don't uncross. Sloane closed her eyes briefly. Because that was it. That was the part no report ever captured. The part no one asked about. The part that didn't fit into heroism. Or failure. Just consequence. When she opened her eyes again, her voice was steady. Controlled. Back where it needed to be. I'm still operational, she said. It sounded like a statement. But it was. Not entirely. Decker studied her for a long moment. Then nodded. Then we'll treat you that way. Simple. Direct. But there was something underneath it. Something like trust. Earned. Not given. He stood. Slowly. Age catching up in small ways. But not weakening him. Just changing him. You don't have to carry it alone, he said before leaving. Sloane didn't respond. Because she didn't know how to. And maybe she wasn't ready to. Yet. He walked away. Footsteps vadding. Leaving her alone again with the sound of the ocean. And the quiet weight inside her chest. Because the truth had been spoken. But not all of it. Not the parts that lived in memory. Not the parts that surfaced when everything else went quiet. And as she sat there, staring into the dark, she felt it again. That pull. That unfinished thread. Because something had happened on that ridge. Something beyond survival. Something she hadn't let herself fully remember. Not yet. But it was there. Waiting. And sooner or later, it would demand to be faced. Not as a soldier. Not as a medic. But as the person who made the choices no one else could. And lived with them after. Why did the mission that should have proven she belonged start to feel like the one that would finally break her? The briefing room was quieter than usual. Not empty. Not tense in the obvious way. Just focused. Roar stood at the front, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the table, the other flipping through a set of satellite images that flickered across the screen behind him. Rural compound, 2 clicks inland, he said. High-value courier confirmed on site, limited window. His voice was steady, measured. Familiar. But Sloane wasn't listening the way she normally did. Not because she didn't care. Because something else had already started. A feeling. Low. Persistent. Like a pressure behind her ribs. She studied the images. Angles, entry points, shadows. Everything looked clean. Too clean. Intel source, she asked. The room shifted slightly. It wasn't a challenge. But it wasn't passive either. Roar glanced at her. Tier 1 relay, he said, cross-checked. Sloane nodded slowly. But the pressure didn't ease. Because she had heard that before. In another room. Years ago. Different mission. Same confidence. Same certainty. Same mistake. She looked back at the screen. And for a brief moment, it wasn't the compound she saw. It was the ridge. The broken terrain. The smoke. The silence that came just before everything went wrong. She blinked. Forced herself back. Present. Focused. You're on overwatch, Roar continued, eyes moving across the team. Hayes, you stay with second element, medical support. There it was. The role. The line. Clear. Defined. Safe. She nodded. Understood. But something inside her didn't settle. Not fully. Because roles didn't always hold. Not when things shifted. Not when reality ignored structure. and she knew that better than anyone in the room. The ride out was quiet. Engines low. Gear checked. No unnecessary words. Sloane sat across from Finch. He didn't speak. Didn't try to fill the space. But his eyes flicked toward her once. Then away. Like he wanted to say something, but didn't know where to start. She didn't help him, because she wasn't sure where she would start either. The helicopter cut through the air with steady precision. Below them, dark terrain stretched endlessly. Unpredictable. Unforgiving. Sloane adjusted her gloves. Checked her kit. Again. And again. Not out of nerves. Out of habit. Because preparation was the only thing that felt certain. Everything else was variable. They landed without incident. Movement was immediate. Clean. Silent. Each step placed with intention. The team spread out, forming a perimeter as they advanced toward the compound. Sloane stayed where she was assigned. Second element. Watching. Tracking. Breathing steady. But her awareness, it stretched further. Beyond her position. Beyond her role. She was mapping everything. Entry points. Escape routes. Elevation shifts. Unconsciously. The same way she had on that ridge. And that was when she felt it again. The pressure. Stronger now. Sharper. Something wasn't right. Not visibly. Not obviously. But there. In the details. The absence of movement. The stillness that felt staged. She slowed slightly. Eyes scanning. Listening. Roar, she said quietly over comms, something's off. A brief pause. Then, be specific. She exhaled, trying to put instinct into words. Too quiet, she said. No external movement, no thermal variation near the perimeter. Another pause. Longer this time. Because instinct wasn't intel. And intel was what missions relied on. Stay sharp, Roar replied. Not dismissal. But not confirmation either. Sloane nodded to herself. And kept moving. Closer now. The compound loomed ahead. Dark. Silent. Waiting. First element reached the outer wall. Breach was set. Timed. Controlled. Sloane positioned herself behind cover, eyes scanning the surrounding terrain. Heart steady. Mind clear. But that pressure, it hadn't gone away. If anything, it was louder now. The breach went off. Sharp. Contained. Entry immediate. Voices low. Commands precise. And for a moment, everything followed the plan. Until it didn't. The first shot came from behind them. Not the compound. The ridge. High ground. Hidden. Exactly where it shouldn't have been. Contact rear. Chaos didn't erupt. It shifted. Controlled. Directed. But fast. Too fast. Sloane dropped low, scanning for the source. There. Movement. Multiple positions. Well concealed. Well prepared. An ambush. Again. Her breath hitched. Just for a second. Because the past didn't stay buried. Not when it recognized itself. Second element fall back, Roar's voice cut through. But the terrain. It wasn't built for retreat. Not cleanly. Not safely. Rounds cracked overhead. Closer. Closer. Sloane's hands moved without hesitation, pulling Jensen behind cover as he stumbled. blood already spreading across his arm. "Stay with me," she said. Voice steady, focused, like before, like always. She worked quickly. Pressure, wrap, assess. But her ears, they tracked everything else. The gunfire, the positions, the angles. And she knew, instinctively, they were pinned. Not fully, not yet, but close, too close. "Roar," she said, sharper now. "They've got elevation and crossfire. We need to reposition." "Working on it," he replied. But his voice, it carried something new. Strain, calculation, time running thinner. Sloane looked up, toward the ridge, and something inside her shifted. Not panic, not fear, recognition. This was it. The same pattern, the same trap. Different place, different team, same outcome, unless something changed. Her pulse slowed, not sped up, because clarity didn't always feel like urgency. Sometimes, it felt like stillness. She glanced at Jensen, stable for now, then at Finch, returning fire, focused, exposed more than he realized. Then at the ridge again. Angles, distance, cover, timing, all aligning in her mind. Uninvited, unavoidable. The line was there again. Clear, defined. Stay in position. Do your role. Or step beyond it. She exhaled slowly, because she already knew the answer. She always had. "I'm moving," she said into comms. Roar's voice snapped back instantly. "Negative, hold your position." She didn't argue, didn't explain, because there wasn't time. And because she had learned something on that ridge. Sometimes the right decision didn't sound right until it was already done. She secured Jensen behind cover. Met Finch's eyes for a brief second. Something passed between them. Not understanding. Not approval. Just awareness. Then she moved. Low. Vast. Deliberate. Not toward safety. Toward the ridge. Gunfire cracked around her. Close enough to feel. Not close enough to stop her. Because fear had already had its moment. And it wasn't in control anymore. She reached the first rise. Dropped. Returned fire. Not wildly. Not reactively. Precisely. Each shot measured. Each movement calculated. The way it had been before. The way she had tried not to remember. "Haze, fall back," Roar's voice again. But she was already beyond that point. Already inside the decision. "They're funneling you," she said. "I can break their angle." Silence. A fraction of a second. Then, "Do it." Permission. Late. But enough. She adjusted her position. Tracked movement. Picked targets. Not as a medic. Not anymore. Something else. Something she had buried. And now couldn't ignore. Time stretched. Or maybe it just felt that way. Shots. Movement. Breath. All narrowing into focus. And slowly, the pressure shifted. The enemy fire faltered. Not stopped, but disrupted. Enough. Just enough. "Move now," she called. First element repositioned. Then second. Space opened. Narrow. Fragile. But real. And just like that, the outcome changed. Not clean. Not perfect, but different. Better. The firefight didn't last much longer after that. Reinforcements arrived. The remaining hostiles disengaged. And the silence that followed felt too familiar. Sloane lowered her weapon, breathing steady, hands controlled. But inside, something trembled. Not from what had just happened, from what it had reminded her of. She walked back toward the team, slowly, not seeking attention, not expecting anything. But she felt their eyes, all of them, different now, because they had seen it. Not the full story, not the past, but enough. Vinge approached first, stopped a few feet away. "You said you were a medic," he said. Not accusing, just trying to understand. Sloane met his gaze. "I am." A pause. "Then, what you did up there?" "I did what was needed." Simple. True. Incomplete. Roar stepped in then. Expression unreadable. But his voice, steady. "You disobeyed a direct order." Sloane didn't look away. "Yes." Another pause. "Longer." "He also saved the team," Finch added quietly. Roar didn't respond immediately. Didn't look at Finch. His eyes stayed on Sloane. Measuring. Weighing. Everything. Then, "We'll debrief when we get back," he said. Not punishment. Not praise. Something in between. Because some actions didn't fit neatly into either. The ride back was quieter than before. Heavier. Not with fear. With understanding. Unspoken. Incomplete. But there. Sloane sat in the same seat. Hands resting still now. Eyes forward. But her mind, it wasn't on the mission. Not entirely. It was on the moment she stepped beyond the line. Again. Not because she wanted to. Because she couldn't ignore it. And that was the part that unsettled her most. Because it meant something hadn't changed. Something hadn't healed. It had just been waiting. And now, it was awake again. As the base came into view below them, Sloane felt it settle deeper. Not resolution. Not closure. Something else. Something heavier. Because this time, she hadn't been alone on that ridge. This time, there were witnesses. And witnesses meant questions. Not just from others. From herself. About where the line really was. And whether she had already crossed it long before today. Because doing what was necessary came at a cost. It always did. The difference was, some costs were visible. And some waited quietly inside you. Until the moment you realized you had never really stopped paying them. What happens when the person who saved everyone isn't sure she can live with how she did it? The debrief room felt smaller than it should have. Not physically, but in the way silence pressed inward, closing space between people who weren't sure what to say. Roar stood at the head of the table again. Same posture, same control, but not the same room. Because now, everyone inside it carried something from the mission. And Sloane, she carried more than most. "Walk it through," Roar said. Simple. Direct. The way debriefs always started. No emotion. No judgment. Just facts. Finch went first. Entry. Breach. Initial contact. His voice steady, professional. But there were moments, small ones, where it tightened. Where memory brushed too close to something real. Ashby followed. Angles. Positions, timing, precise, detached. But his eyes flicked toward Sloane once, then away, because even in structure, there were things that didn't fit neatly. Then it was her turn. No one said her name. They didn't need to. Sloane sat still for a moment, hands resting lightly on the table, breath even, controlled. Then, second element maintained position during initial breach, she said. Her voice was calm, measured, like everything else about her. Contact initiated from elevated rear position, multiple hostiles, coordinated crossfire. She paused, just long enough for the next part to matter. Jensen was hit, stabilized, remained operational. Jensen shifted slightly in his seat. Alive. Because of her. But she didn't look at him. Didn't acknowledge it. Because that wasn't the part that stayed with her. I assessed enemy positioning and moved to disrupt their angle of fire. There it was. Clean. Factual. Stripped of everything it actually meant. Roar's eyes held on her. You disobeyed a direct order. Not a question. Not an accusation. A point. Sloane nodded once. Yes. Silence followed. Not heavy. Not yet. Just waiting. Why, he asked. One word. But it carried everything. Command. Responsibility. Trust. And the moment she stepped beyond it, Sloane didn't answer immediately. Because the real answer wasn't tactical. It wasn't something you could put in a report. But she tried anyway. They were closing the angle, she said. If we held position, we would have been contained. Roar didn't break eye contact. That's not what I asked. And just like that, the room shifted. Because now it wasn't about what happened. It was about why she chose it. And those were never the same thing. Sloane exhaled slowly. Felt that familiar pressure rising again. Not from the room. From inside. Because this was the part she couldn't keep contained. I've seen that pattern before, she said quietly. No one moved. No one interrupted. Because they all knew. This wasn't just about today anymore. It doesn't end well, she added. Her voice was steady, but softer now. Less controlled. Roar studied her. Understanding forming. Not fully, but enough. You reacted, he said. Sloane shook her head slightly. No. A pause. I remembered. That landed. Harder than anything else she had said. Because memory wasn't strategy. It was something deeper. Something harder to measure. The room stayed silent. Not because they didn't have questions. Because they didn't know which ones to ask. Roar leaned back slightly. Considering. Then, you put yourself out of position, he said. If that move failed, we'd be down another operator. Sloane nodded. Yes. No defense. No justification. Just acceptance. Because he wasn't wrong. And you made that call alone, he continued. Another nod. Yes. A long pause. Then, I'd make it again. The words came before she could stop them. Not loud. Not defiant. Just honest. And honesty sometimes cost more than silence. The room held still. Because that sentence, it wasn't about the mission. It was about her. About the line she walked. And how far she was willing to go. Roar didn't respond immediately. Didn't react the way some commanders might. Instead, he studied her. Not as a problem, not as a liability, but as something more complicated, something harder to define. Finally, "You don't get to make that call lightly," he said. Sloane's gaze didn't drop. "I don't." And that was the truth. He nodded slowly. Not agreement, not approval, but acknowledgement, because he could see it. The weight behind her decisions, the cost she carried into them. "Debrief's over," he said. Just like that. No resolution. No clear outcome. Because some things couldn't be settled in a room. People stood. Chairs shifted. The normal rhythm returned. But it didn't feel normal. Not anymore. Finch lingered. Just for a second. Then stepped toward her. "You saved us," he said quietly. Sloane looked at him. Really looked. "You were already fighting," she replied. He shook his head. "That's not the same." A pause. Then, "Thank you." Simple words. But they carried something real. Something unguarded. She nodded once. Didn't say anything else. Because gratitude. It didn't sit easily with her. Not when she knew the full picture. Not when she knew what it took. That night the bass felt different again. Quieter. Not with tension. With reflection. Sloane walked alone. No destination. Just movement. Because staying still made things louder. Her steps carried her to the edge of the training grounds. Same place as before. Same horizon. Different weight. She stopped. Looked out. And for a moment, she let herself feel it. Not just the mission. Not just the past. All of it. The ridge. The choices. The line she crossed. Again. Her hands tightened slightly at her sides. Because this time, there was no gunfire. No urgency. Nothing to distract from the truth. "You didn't tell them everything." Decker's voice. Behind her. She didn't turn. "I know." He stepped closer. Not too close. Just enough. "They need to understand you," he said. Sloane let out a slow breath. "They understand enough." "Do they?" She didn't answer. Because that question, it wasn't about them. It was about her. Decker watched her for a moment. Then, "What happened after the ridge?" he asked. And there it was. The part she hadn't said. The part she hadn't faced. Not fully. Sloane closed her eyes briefly. Because even now, it wasn't easy. Not the memory. Not the truth inside it. "I got them out," she said. "That's what the report says," Decker replied. And then, silence. Longer this time. Because this was where the story changed. "I went back," she said finally. The words barely above a whisper. Decker didn't react. But something in the air shifted. "Why?" he asked. Sloane opened her eyes. Stared out at the dark horizon. Because the answer. It wasn't tactical. It wasn't logical. "I thought there was someone else," she said. A pause. I heard movement. Another pause. But there was. Her voice tightened slightly. Just enough. And by the time I realized that, she stopped. Didn't finish. Didn't need to. Decker understood. Because he knew what came next. The part no one wrote down. "You stayed too long," he said quietly. Sloane nodded. "Yes." "And you were alone." Another nod. "Yes." Silence settled between them. But it wasn't empty. It was full of everything she hadn't said, everything she had carried. "You crossed a line out there," Decker said. Not accusing, not condemning, just nomming it. Sloane's voice was steady, but softer now. "I know." A long pause. Then, "Do you regret it?" he asked. That question, that one didn't have a clean answer. Sloane stared into the distance. At nothing. At everything. "I regret not knowing where the line was," she said. Honest. Unprotected. And now. She took a breath. Slow. Measured. "I'm starting to think," she said, "there isn't one." The words hung there. Heavy. Unsettling. Because if that was true, then everything changed. Decker studied her. Not with concern. With understanding. Because he had been there too. Different place. Different time. Same realization. "Then you don't follow the line," he said quietly. "You define it." Sloane didn't respond. Because that felt heavier than anything else. Responsibility. Choice. Consequence. All resting in the same place. Inside her. Decker turned to leave. But before he did, he stopped. "You saved my life out there," he said. Not formal. Not distant. Just real. Sloane looked down. Then back up. "I did my job." A faint smile touched his face. Brief. Knowing. "No," he said, "you did more than that." And then he was gone, leaving her alone again. With the horizon. With the silence. With herself. Sloane stood there for a long time. Not moving. Not thinking. Just existing in the space between what she had done and what it meant. Because the mission was over. The questions had been asked. The truth, most of it, had been spoken. But the real weight, the real story, it didn't live in reports. It lived here, in the quiet moments, in the choices no one saw, in the lines that blurred when no one else was there to define them. And as she finally turned to walk back, something inside her felt different. Not lighter, not resolved, but clearer. Because maybe the point was never to erase what happened, or to justify it, or even to fully understand it. Maybe it was to carry it, without letting it define everything. To keep moving, even when the past walked beside you. Silent, unseen, but always there. And as Sloane stepped back into the dim light of the base, she didn't feel like a hero. She didn't feel like a survivor. She felt like someone still learning where she stood, between who she was and who she had to become. Because sometimes strength isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand to be seen. Sometimes it's quiet, steady, unyielding, like a heartbeat in the dark. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.